Hey everybody, it's Last Protagonist. Recently I've been experimenting with things like piercing, chaining, and forking on enemies with projectiles, and I wanted to share my findings because they're a little unintuitive and it's a lot easier to understand them once you see what's going on, because there's some things going on under the hood which are a little bit difficult to understand. So first things first, let's go ahead and pull up the chain support gem, which says it supports projectile skills and any other skills that chain, causing them to chain additional times. So when we actually look at the chain tag, it says effects that chain are redirected to another target after hitting an enemy. Projectiles cannot chain from enemies they pierce or fork from. So that's kind of true, but it's also kind of not the full picture. So you actually can chain attacks from enemies provided you are chaining from the terrain. And that works even if you've pierced them or forked them. And I'll show that off in a moment because I have two skills, Galvanic Shard and Lightning Blast, which will highlight the issues with chaining in great detail. So the way that my passive tree is set up right now, I have 115% chance to pierce enemies with my projectiles because I've got the pierce nodes. And right now I have a flat 50% chance to chain attacks from terrain. So I can't show this off unless I'm near an enemy, but if I fire it, it'll like bounce off the ground or the wall and it'll like track onto nearby enemies. Although when we look back at the chain tag, it says projectiles have a base chaining distance of 6 meters, whereas other effects have a chaining distance of 4 meters. So the other effects, I believe, are essentially just the chaining from terrain. So you have 4 meters with which you can chain from terrain, which is pretty paltry, and it kind of sucks because I think a lot of the skills that would benefit the most from chain tend to be a little bit longer distance. So let's go ahead and show that off in action. Like I said, my Galvanic Shards have a pierce chance of 115%, and I don't think chain shows up on this part of the tree. No, so we need to look at ammo. They have an additional chance to chain from terrain of 50%. And right now I do have the Ricochet support gem slotted into this, so it should have technically had an extra 40% on top of my base 50% to give it 90% chance to chain, but for whatever reason this does not work. So 50%, 50%, and there's nothing here. However, if we look at a skill like Plasma Blast, which I have Scattershot on to just show you guys the chaining effect more, it will say, not on this page, but still on ammo, that we have a 50% chance to chain. But if we put on another Ricochet support, on the main page it says we have a chance of 90% to chain off of terrain, which does not work. This is bugged. I believe what happens is Ricochet might overwrite my basic passives from my skill tree, and so I might only have a 40% chance to chain, because it does feel a little bit less than 50%. So I'll be showing that off here against Doriani. So 4 meters with which to chain attacks is really small, and chaining terrain works better on shotgun-esque abilities where you have a bunch of fragments going everywhere. So that way if I shoot Doriani, they'll bounce off the wall and come back to him. The further away I get, the less chance I have to chain. So I'm not chaining now. So one of the other weird things that I've discovered about these chain interactions is that it's kind of dependent on the line of sight to the enemy, in that if I'm facing away from Doriani, but I'm close to him, I'm still not going to be chaining projectiles. But if I have like a 180-degree cone toward his direction, then I will be able to start chaining attacks toward him. So this just kind of shows it off. Like if I turn away, then nothing happens. But if I go next to the wall, it works for whatever reason. So that's a little bit unintuitive. So let's go ahead and show this off a bit more with the plasma bolt. The further that he is away from the wall, I will not be able to chain off of him with these kind of piercing type abilities. So that is perfectly intended. It shouldn't happen that way. I guess we'll need to respawn. because when he's in the middle of the arena in phase 2, I will not be able to chain off the walls with him. But you could still chain with the scatter shot type abilities of galvanic shards. So because he hops down here and he's next to the wall, we'll be able to show off plasma burst. Then remember, the tooltip said I had 90% chance to chain off walls. We chained 0 times right there, which is a little bit unfortunate. So we got 2 in a row. All right, and that one was 3. Okay. So just to show that the chances aren't super crazy at 90%. I think we just had 3 again right there. Go figure. And then we just failed 3 times. Although maybe I missed and it doesn't count because he didn't pierce. I wondered if that's a possibility. So we'll restart that again. And now this is something that becomes a little bit more obvious the more you test it. I would show it off with the galvanic shards, but the ability has so many projectiles and so much visual noise already that it's kind of hard to tell whether or not 90% of the projectiles are chaining appropriately, which is why I'm using the plasma burst with the scatter shot just to not have to charge up 30 times to show it off. So we got 2 chains and 1. So it definitely feels a lot less than 90. So, like I was saying, the chains also work off the ground with these types of abilities because they don't like pierce directly in the air. So when you're using abilities like plasma burst or armor piercing rounds or high velocity rounds, ones which just kind of go straight, you're going to have less effective chaining if you don't have a wall around you than compared to an ability like scattershot. Not scattershot, I keep calling it scattershot. Like galvanic shards or fragmentation rounds, because they do kind of naturally hit the ground on their own. So even though I'm not necessarily facing Doriani at times, you can still see that this can chain off the ground toward him. And it seems to work with walls a lot better because not all of the projectiles are hitting the ground. So keep in mind we have about a 4-meter radius for this to work, which is about that. So I should not be chaining. Well, he's moving too close. It's kind of a short range to chain enemies, especially if you're trying to snipe them from something like plasma bolts. So in some ways, chain is a lot weaker than I expected it would be. Although it can still be very valuable even if you're piercing through enemies by chaining off terrain. So like this, it feels like it should work, but it doesn't. But that is what indeed the tools tip says, but it's just not something that I would have expected, and I expect a lot of people might feel similarly. So that'll be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you guys have learned some things. I do think that the Ricochet thing is a bug, and it should be addressed. So if we could share this to more people so that way hopefully eyes at GGG can see this and fix it. Or if they don't want that to get fixed, maybe they could just adjust some numbers or some tooltips. I think that'd be great as well. So if you did enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe and all that. I think I just said that. Anyway, I'll stop rambling for now. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. Stay safe. Last protagonist out.